December 1874. The high plains of southern Kansas, a stage road 40 miles west of Wichita, in the worst blizzard the territory had seen in 20 years. By morning, 9 people on a stranded mail coach should have frozen to death, and every one of them lived, because of a man none of them could name, and none of them would ever turn in. Here is the story. The Wichita-to-Fort Dodge mail coach left the station at first light. Ahead of the storm, the driver swore he could outrun. His name was Asa Boone, and he had driven that road 11 years and never lost a passenger. There were 8 souls inside and on top of his coach that morning. A circuit preacher named Mr. Hollis, a widow, Mrs. Caraway, carrying her late husband's watch home to his mother. 2 cattle buyers from Kansas City, a young schoolteacher, Miss Ellen Pryor, going west to a post she had never seen, and a mother, Sarah Dell, with her boy Tobias, 6 years old, who had a cough that had not broken in a week. The storm did not stay behind them. By noon the sky went the color of lead, and then it went white, and then it went away altogether. The wind came down off the plains at 40 miles an hour and drove the snow flat across the road until Asa Boone could not see his own lead horses. He kept the team to the ruts by feel. And then, 4 miles short of the relay station at Crooked Creek, the coach went off the road into a drift. The front axle dropped into a washout under the snow, and the whole thing came to a stop and would not move again. Asa Boone knew what that meant. He had seen men freeze on this road. He knew that 4 miles, in this wind, with a sick child and a widow and a schoolteacher in town shoes, was the same as 40. He cut the lead horses loose to save them, brought the passengers down into the lee of the coach, where the wind was a little less murder, and he told them the truth, because he was that kind of man. There was no help coming, not in this. They would have to live till morning on what they had, and what they had was 1 coach, a few blankets, and no wood for 40 miles in any direction but what the coach itself was made of. Wherever you're watching from, drop it in the comments. I'd like to see how far this one travels. They burnt the mail first. 2 sacks of letters, somebody's Christmas money, somebody's land deed, all of it fed into a little fire they built in the iron box of a wheel hub, out of the wind. It bought them an hour. They burned the preacher's spare Bible pages and the cattle buyer's paper ledgers. They burned the floorboards of the coach, pried up one at a time with a wheel iron. The boy Tobias had stopped coughing, and his mother knew that was worse, not better. Miss Pryor held the child against her own body under the last dry blanket and could not feel her own feet. The temperature went on falling. It would reach 30 below before the night was through, and somewhere out in that white roaring dark, a man on horseback was following the same road. He was not supposed to be on it. He had broken off from 3 other men 2 days back after a thing went wrong near the Oklahoma line, and he was riding north and west alone, keeping off the main trails when the blizzard caught him in the open. He had done the smart thing, the thing that keeps a hunted man alive. He had found a cut bank out of the wind, gotten his horse down into it, and meant to wait the night out. And then, in a lull in the wind, he heard it, thin, almost nothing, swallowed up the next second. A child crying, somewhere out on the road. A hunted man does not ride toward sound in the dark. Sound in the dark is how a hunted man dies. It is a lawman's trick, or a trap, or nothing at all. Your own mind turning the wind into voices. Every instinct he had, every hard year that had kept him breathing, told him to stay down in that cut bank and let the road keep its secrets. He had spent a decade learning to do exactly the opposite of what a decent man's gut tells him to do, because the decent man's gut gets you hanged. He sat there in the lee with his horse and he listened, and the cry came again, thinner now, and then it did not come again at all, and that silence was somehow worse than the crying had been. He told himself it was the wind. He almost believed it. And then he got up out of the only safe place for 40 miles in any direction, and he got his cold horse up out of it too, and he turned its head straight into the teeth of the wind toward the crying that had already stopped. He nearly rode over the coach before he saw it. A dark shape with a dying orange glow at the base of it, 8 people packed into the lee of a dead stagecoach, burning the coach itself a board at a time to stay alive. Asa Boone came up out of the huddle with the wheel iron raised, because in that country a shape coming out of a blizzard at night was as likely to rob you as save you. The man on the horse did not even slow for it. "Put it down," he said. "How many you got, and how many can still walk?" He had been on that road, not the mail road, the other one, the one no honest man rides, but he knew this country the way a hunted man has to know country, and he knew something Asa Boone did not. There was a line shack, a cattle line cabin, sod and timber, dug into the side of a rise about a mile north, that the big outfits kept for their winter riders. He had sheltered in it once, the kind of once a man does not explain. It had a stove, it had a woodpile, and a mile, in that wind, with the man on the horse breaking trail in front, was a thing 9 people might just barely live through. They did it the only way it could be done. The strongest broke trail. The man on the horse went first, on foot, leading the animal by the bridle through snow to his thighs so the saddle could carry whoever was failing worst. The horse carried the boy Tobias and the widow Mrs. Caraway, and then the stranger turned it around and brought it back, and they put the next weakest up, and he led it forward again, back and again, back and again, a mile cut into a dozen brutal pieces. He had strung a line between them all out of harness leather and his own belt and a length of the coach's reins, and he made every one of them keep a hand on it, because in snow like that a person who steps 3 feet off the trail is simply gone. He carried the schoolteacher the last quarter mile himself when her legs quit under her and she went down without a sound, and he put his own coat around her and took the cold into himself instead. It took most of 2 hours to move 1 mile. Nobody let go of the rope. Nobody was left behind. When they got the stove going in that buried sod cabin and the first real heat hit their faces, 2 of the hard cattle buyers from Kansas City wept like children and were not ashamed of it, and no one else was either. He went back out. That is the part Asa Boone told for the rest of his life, and the part he could never quite get through without stopping. The man got them all inside, into the warm, into safety, and then, while the rest of them were still shaking and weeping and feeling their hands come back to life, he buttoned what was left of his coat and opened that door and walked back out into the 30 below dark, alone, and went the mile back to the wrecked coach. He brought up the mail they hadn't burned. He found Mrs. Caraway's husband's watch, the one thing in the world she had left of the man, dropped somewhere in the snow in the panic, and he brought that back to her too. He brought the last blankets. He made that round trip twice more before morning. Every single time the cabin door opened and that wall of killing cold came rolling in across the floor, somebody by the stove counted heads, and every time the head that was missing was his, and everyone else was the one sitting safe and warm by the fire he had carried them to. Toward morning the boy Tobias's cough broke, the good way this time, and he slept. The wind began to fall off near dawn, the way plains blizzards do, all at once, like something letting go. And in the grey first light, with all 9 of them alive in a sod cabin that smelled of wood smoke and wet wool and breathing, Miss Ellen Pryor, the schoolteacher, finally got a good look at the man who had carried her the last quarter mile. She knew the face. She could not think from where, and then she could, and the knowing of it went through her colder than anything the night had done. There had been a paper pinned up on the board in the Wichita depot, where she had waited 2 hours for the coach with her trunk at her feet. A printed face, and under it a single word in heavy black letters, and under that a sum of money larger than her whole year's wage as a teacher, larger than 3 years of it. She had glanced at it the way you glance at such things and forgotten it inside a minute. She was not forgetting it now. She stood very still by the stove, with the heat finally coming back into her hands, and she looked at the man who had carried her the last quarter mile with his own coat around her shoulders and the cold going into his body instead of hers, and he felt her looking. He turned his head and he saw her face, and he saw her place it. He saw her know exactly who he was. He did not reach for anything. He just looked back at her, tired down past the bone, and waited to see what she would do, the way he had waited his whole life to see what people would do when they knew. And Ellen Pryor turned to the stove and poured a tin cup of coffee from the pot they had going now, and carried it across the little room and put it in his hands. "You're near frozen, mister," she said. "Sit down by the fire. You've done enough." And she did not say the other thing. Not then, not to the others, not ever. He stayed until he was sure, until the storm was truly done, and the relay station men had broken through with a wagon and fresh horses, and all 9 passengers were going to make the road to Crooked Creek alive. Then he saddled his horse while they were busy with the rescue wagon, and he was a half-mile gone before anyone thought to look for him. The boy Tobias asked his mother where the man had gone. Sarah Dell looked out at the single line of tracks already filling with new snow and could not answer him. It was Asa Boone, the driver, who said it out loud, days later, back in Wichita, when a deputy was taking down what had happened on the road. Asa described the man plain, the way a driver remembers a face he watched in firelight all night. And the deputy went a little pale, and he got up, and he took a folded paper out of a desk drawer and laid it flat on the wood between them. Asa Boone looked down at that printed face for a long, long moment. The reward sum was right there under it in black ink. Asa had 9 living passengers because of the man on that paper. He looked up at the deputy, and his weathered face did not change at all. "No," Asa said. "No, that wasn't him. Fellow that helped us was just some rider caught out in the storm, same as us. Never did get his name." And the deputy looked at Asa Boone, and Asa looked right back at him, steady, and neither one of them blinked. And the deputy folded the paper up slow and put it back in the drawer and slid it shut. Because the deputy had a wife and 2 children on that same open plains road, and he understood, better than most, exactly what kind of man rides a mile back into 30 below dark 3 times for strangers who can never pay him for it. 9 people went home from that storm. The widow Mrs. Carraway delivered her husband's watch to his mother in Fort Dodge. The 2 cattle buyers told the story in stockyard offices for 30 years. The preacher, Mr. Hollis, put it in a sermon and left the name out because there was no name to put in. Sarah Dell's boy Tobias grew up and farmed and named his own first son after nobody in particular, a plain, strong name, and never quite knew why he liked it so well. And Ellen Pryor taught school in western Kansas for 41 years and told that blizzard story to 30 classes of children, and every single time she ended it the same way. A man came out of the storm who didn't have to and carried us home and asked for nothing, and the only thing he ever took was the cold so we wouldn't have to. She knew who he was. She carried it her whole life and told no one, because she had decided, standing by that stove at dawn, that the man who walked back into the dark 3 times for strangers had already answered the only question that paper ever asked about him. Within 8 years, the man would be dead, shot in the back of his own house for the reward money on that paper by someone who called him a friend. The world remembers him for the worst day of his life and the worst things said about him. Almost no one remembers a sod cabin in a Kansas blizzard and 9 people alive at dawn who should not have been, and the tin cup of coffee a schoolteacher put into the hands of the most wanted man in America, because she had just watched, all night long, exactly what kind of man he chose to be when nobody was keeping score. His name was Jesse James. Out on that road, in that storm, it did not matter what the paper said he was. It only mattered what he did. And what he did was turn his horse into the wind toward a child crying in the dark when every reason in the world told him to stay hidden and stay alive. If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on, and subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more of these coming.